I'm not the kind of guy who believes in monsters. Never was. I'm an electrician. Dean Cooper, 34 years old, born and raised in Marietta, Ohio. I work with my hands, deal in circuits and voltages, things that follow rules you can test and verify. My wife Sarah teaches 3rd grade at Warren Elementary. Our daughter Emma was 9 that summer, and our son Jake had just turned 6. We're normal people. We go to Jake's soccer games on Saturdays. We argue about whose turn it is to take out the trash. We watch too much Netflix after the kids go to bed. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand who I was before August 2019. I was the guy who rolled his eyes at ghost shows on TV. When my cousin Mark talked about seeing a UFO over the Ohio River, I laughed and asked him how many beers he'd had. I believed in what I could see, touch, and wire into a breaker box. The universe made sense. It was quantifiable. I'm sitting here now in my living room, the same living room where we open Christmas presents and where Jake builds his Lego sets all over the carpet. And I can hear Mrs. Patterson's dog barking next door. A car just drove past with its stereo too loud. These ordinary sounds used to be just background noise. Now they're comforting. They mean everything is normal, everything is safe. But I need to tell you what happened 4 years ago, even though part of me still can't believe I'm doing this. I've typed this out and deleted it probably a dozen times over the past few months. Sarah doesn't think I should share it. She says people will think we're crazy, or worse, that they'll believe us and start asking questions she doesn't want to answer again. But there are other families who rent cabins in southeastern Ohio near Wayne National Forest, and they should know. They deserve to know. The weight of keeping this quiet has been crushing me for 4 years now. Every time I see another family loading up their SUV for a weekend getaway, I want to stop them and ask where they're going. I want to warn them. But how do you tell a stranger that something impossible is out there? How do you say it without sounding like you've lost your mind? My hands are shaking a little as I type this. Even now, even in broad daylight, with my doors locked and my security system armed. Yes, we have a security system now, though we never did before. I feel that weight in my chest. The weight of knowing something most people don't believe exists. The weight of having seen it. It was supposed to be a simple family vacation. We pulled off Rinnard Mills Road around 3:30 on Thursday afternoon, August 15th, 2019. The gravel driveway leading to the cabin was longer than I expected, maybe a quarter mile, and it curved through thick stands of oak and maple that made a tunnel of green overhead. The August sun filtered through the canopy in shafts of golden light, and Sarah rolled down her window to let in the breeze. It smelled incredible. Pine and rich earth, and that particular sweetness of late summer in Ohio, when everything is lush and heavy with growth. "Dad, I can't see any other houses," Emma said from the back seat, her face pressed to the window. "That's the point, kiddo," I said, grinning at her in the rear-view mirror. "No neighbors, no traffic, just us and the trees." "Are there bears?" Jake asked, suddenly worried. "Maybe," Sarah told him, reaching back to ruffle his hair. "But they're more scared of you than you are of them." I remember feeling so good in that moment, proud even. I'd found this place on one of those vacation rental sites, and the photos had looked perfect. Secluded but not too rustic, affordable for a long weekend. We'd been planning this for months. No phones, no tablets, no TV. Just family time. Real connection. Sarah had been after me about it since spring, saying the kids were growing up too fast, that we needed to make memories before Emma hit those teenage years where she'd stop wanting to hang out with us. The cabin came into view as the driveway opened into a clearing, and it was better than the pictures. 2 stories of honey-colored wood, with a wide deck wrapping around the front and right side. The windows were large and clean, reflecting the forest behind us. Flower boxes under the ground floor windows overflowed with petunias and some kind of vine I didn't recognize. The lawn was neatly mowed, maybe an acre of open space before the tree line closed in on all sides like a dark green wall. "It's perfect," Sarah breathed, and I could hear the relief in her voice. She'd been worried, I knew she had, that the place would be a dump, that I'd cheaped out and found some nightmare with a leaky roof and no running water. But it was perfect. God, it really was perfect. The kids exploded out of the car before I'd even put it in park, racing toward the deck stairs. "Shoes on," Sarah called after them, but she was smiling. We unloaded our bags and groceries, and I took my time carrying everything in, just enjoying the quiet. Cicadas sang in the trees, and somewhere deeper in the woods I could hear a woodpecker hammering away. Birds called to each other, cardinals, blue jays, the low coo of mourning doves. Inside, the cabin was clean and smelled like pine cleaner and old wood. The furniture was rustic but comfortable. A big sectional couch facing a stone fireplace, a dining table that could seat 8, and a kitchen with all the appliances we'd need. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, with one of those deep clawfoot tubs that Sarah immediately claimed for a long soak later. The owner left a welcome basket, Sarah called from the kitchen, and I found her pulling out a bottle of local wine, some cheese and crackers, and a handwritten note welcoming the Cooper family and reminding us that the nearest grocery store was in Grayson, 20 miles north. The note also mentioned that cell service could be spotty, but there was a landline if we needed it. 20 miles to the nearest town. I remember thinking that sounded wonderful. Total privacy, total peace. We spent the rest of the afternoon exploring. The kids found a tire swing hanging from a massive oak at the edge of the clearing, and I pushed them until my arms got tired. Sarah unpacked and organized everything the way she likes it. And I set up our camping chairs in a circle for the fire we'd have that evening. The woods around us were alive with sound, branches rustling in the breeze, small animals moving through the underbrush. That constant hum of insects that you only get deep in the forest. Around 6:30, I started the fire in the stone ring, about 20 yards from the deck. The logs I'd brought from home caught easily, and soon we had a beautiful blaze going. The sun was getting lower, turning everything golden, and the temperature was dropping from the day's heat into that perfect evening coolness. Sarah brought out hot dogs and marshmallows, and we roasted dinner over the flames, while the kids told knock-knock jokes that didn't quite make sense, and laughed anyway. I remember looking at my family in the firelight, Emma's face smudged with marshmallow, Jake's gap-toothed grin, Sarah's hand resting on my knee, and thinking this was exactly what we needed. This was exactly right. In that moment, I felt like I'd nailed it. Best dad move of the year. Sarah caught my eye and smiled, and I knew she was thinking the same thing. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. Jake leaned against my side, getting heavy the way he does when he's tired and content. Emma was telling some elaborate story about a girl in her class who could supposedly do a backflip off the monkey bars. The s'mores were perfect. Marshmallows burnt to a crisp on the outside and molten on the inside, exactly how we all like them. "Can we sleep outside?" Jake asked, drowsy now. Not tonight, buddy, I said. But maybe we'll do that at home sometime in the backyard. The woods were getting darker, the tree line becoming a solid wall of black. Twilight in the forest is different than in town. It comes faster, heavier. The sounds were changing too. The daybirds going quiet, the night insects tuning up. I heard an owl hoot somewhere off to the west, and something small rustled through the leaves beyond the firelight's reach. I think it's bedtime, Sarah said, gathering up our plates and marshmallow sticks. The kids protested, but not much. They were worn out from the drive and the excitement. We doused the fire with the bucket of water I'd left nearby, and the sudden hiss and steam made Jake jump and giggle. The coals glowed red in the darkness, fading slowly as we gathered everything and headed inside. I took one last look at the woods before following my family in. The stars were starting to come out, more than we ever saw in Marietta. The forest was a dark mass surrounding our little island of light from the cabin windows. It looked peaceful, beautiful, ancient and untouched. I locked the door behind us, just habit, even though we were miles from anyone, and helped Sarah get the kids ready for bed. We tucked them in, and they were both asleep before we made it downstairs. Sarah poured us each a glass of the wine from the welcome basket, and we sat on the couch with our feet up, listening to the cabin settle and creak around us. "This was a good idea," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Yeah," I agreed. "This is exactly what we needed." I believed that in that moment. I really did. The first night was perfect, peaceful, everything a family vacation should be. I had no idea what was already out there, watching from the tree line. No idea that something had noticed our arrival. No idea that we'd just entered a territory that didn't belong to us and that we were being evaluated by something that saw us not as visitors but as prey. Friday morning started the way any perfect vacation morning should. I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom curtains and the smell of coffee. Sarah had gotten up before me and started a pot. Through the open window, I could hear the kids already up and playing on the deck, their laughter mixing with bird song. I stretched, feeling the pleasant ache of good sleep in an unfamiliar bed. And for a moment, I just lay there, grateful. This was exactly what we'd needed. By 9:30, we'd all eaten breakfast. Pancakes that Sarah made from the mix we'd brought. Way too much syrup, according to her. Exactly the right amount, according to the kids. And we'd decided on a morning hike. There was a trail that started just past the tree line on the eastern edge of the property, marked by a weathered wooden sign that read, "Overlook Trail, 2.3 miles. The cabin owner had mentioned it in the welcome information, saying it led to a nice view of the valley. We loaded up a backpack with water bottles and snacks, slathered the kids in sunscreen despite their protests, and headed out around 10. The temperature was already climbing toward what would be another hot August day, but under the forest canopy it was cool and pleasant. The trail was well maintained, wide enough for us to walk 2 by 2, with Jake holding Sarah's hand and Emma ranging ahead, playing her favorite game of being a nature explorer. "Dad, what kind of tree is this?" She'd call back every few minutes, and I'd give her my best guess, which was usually wrong. I'm an electrician, not a botanist. But she didn't care. She was in her element, collecting interesting leaves and pointing out mushrooms growing on fallen logs. The forest was beautiful. Shafts of sunlight cut through the canopy in golden columns, illuminating floating dust motes and the occasional spider web stretched between branches. Ferns carpeted the forest floor, and I could hear water somewhere off to our left, probably a creek running down toward the valley. Birds called back and forth, and insects hummed in the undergrowth. It smelled like earth and growing things, that rich forest smell that you can't get anywhere else. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I first noticed something off. It was subtle at first. Emma had stopped to examine something on the trail. A beetle, I think. And we'd all paused with her. In that moment of stillness, I realized I couldn't hear any birds. The constant backdrop of chirping and calling that had been there since we'd entered the woods was just gone. I tilted my head, listening. No birds, no insects either, now that I was paying attention. Even that creek sound had faded, though I wasn't sure if we just walked out of earshot. Weird, I muttered. What? Sarah asked, shifting the backpack on her shoulders. Nothing, just... It got quiet all of a sudden. She paused, listening. Huh. Yeah, I guess so. Emma had lost interest in the beetle and was already walking ahead again, and Jake was tugging on Sarah's hand, so we kept moving. But the silence stayed with me. It wasn't natural, that level of quiet. Even in a forest, there should be sounds. Wind in the leaves, animals moving through underbrush, something. But it was like we were walking through a sound-dampened room. Our footsteps on the trail seemed too loud, and when Jake said something to Sarah, his voice carried in a way it hadn't before. The back of my neck prickled. I found myself glancing into the trees on either side of the trail, though I couldn't have said what I was looking for. Everything looked normal. Just trees and ferns and dappled sunlight. But something felt wrong. The air felt heavier somehow, like pressure building before a storm, though the sky above the canopy was still clear and blue. Maybe we should head back, I said, and I heard something in my own voice that I didn't like. Uncertainty, unease. Sarah gave me a look. We just got started. The overlook is supposed to be beautiful. I know, I trailed off. What was I going to say? That the forest was too quiet? That I had a bad feeling? I'd sound ridiculous. Yeah, you're right. Let's keep going. But I noticed Sarah looking around too now, her expression thoughtful. She'd picked up on something in my tone. We walked for another 10 minutes, and slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice at first, the sounds started to come back. A bird called somewhere off to the right. Insects began humming again. By the time we reached the overlook, a cleared area with a vista of the valley below, everything seemed normal again. I stood there looking out at the rolling hills covered in forest, the distant ribbon of a road cutting through the green, and told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Or maybe there was a simple explanation. A hawk flying over that had scared the smaller birds into silence. Or we'd just happened to walk through a patch of woods that was naturally quieter. These things happen. The forest isn't some supernatural entity. It's just trees and animals following their natural patterns. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been watched during those silent minutes. That something had been paying very close attention to us, and we'd been too oblivious to notice anything but the absence of sound. We took some pictures at the overlook. I have them on my phone still, all of us smiling with the valley behind us, looking like a perfect happy family on a perfect vacation. And then we headed back. The return trip was uneventful. The woods were full of normal forest sounds. The kids complained about being tired and hungry. Sarah and I talked about what to make for lunch. Everything was fine. I'd almost forgotten about the silence by the time we got back to the cabin around noon. The rest of Friday afternoon passed pleasantly. The kids played on the tire swing while Sarah read on the deck, and I dozed in one of the camping chairs, sun-warmed and content. We had sandwiches for lunch, and later I drove into Grayson to get some supplies we'd forgotten, lighter fluid and hot dog buns, the essentials. The town was small and clearly hurting, with more empty storefronts than open ones. But the guy at the general store was friendly enough. He asked where we were staying, and when I mentioned Rinnard Mills Road, something flickered across his face. But it was gone so fast I thought I'd imagined it, and he just nodded and wished me a good weekend. I got back to the cabin around 5:30, and by 7 I was standing on the deck, getting the grill ready for dinner. Sarah had marinated chicken earlier, and I could see her through the kitchen window, preparing a salad while the kids set the table. The sun was getting lower, painting everything in that golden late-day light that makes even ordinary things look beautiful. The shadows from the trees were getting longer, stretching across the lawn toward the cabin like dark fingers. I was arranging the charcoal, looking forward to an evening much like the previous one. Good food, maybe another fire, the kids getting worn out and going to bed early so Sarah and I could have some quiet time together. When the smell hit me, it came suddenly, carried on a breeze I hadn't even noticed until that moment. And it wasn't just unpleasant, it was overwhelming, physically nauseating. I actually gagged, dropping the bag of charcoal and stepping back from the grill like the smell was coming from there. But it wasn't. It was all around me, thick and cloying, filling my nose and throat. The best way I can describe it is if you took a dog that had been rolling in something dead, mixed it with the smell of rotting meat in summer heat, and then added this musky animal odor underneath it all. Something wild and wrong. It was so strong I could almost taste it. This foul coating at the back of my throat that made me want to spit. The sliding glass door scraped open behind me and Sarah stepped out, already wrinkling her nose. "What is that?" She got 3 words out before the smell hit her full force. I watched her face go pale, one hand coming up to cover her mouth and nose. "Oh God, Dean, what?" She didn't finish. She turned and practically ran back inside, and I heard her shouting for the kids to get away from the windows to move to the upstairs bathroom. Through the glass, I could see Emma's face, confused and frightened. And then Sarah was ushering them both away from the kitchen. I was alone on the deck with that smell, and I realized I was breathing through my mouth, short, shallow breaths that barely helped. My eyes were watering. The smell seemed to be getting stronger, not weaker, and I had this sudden, visceral image of something dead, lying just beyond the tree line, something large enough to produce this level of stench. A deer, maybe, killed by coyotes and left to rot in the heat. But even as I thought it, I knew that didn't make sense. A dead deer wouldn't smell like this, or rather, it would smell like decay, but not this wild musk underneath, not this deliberate quality. And the smell seemed to be moving, shifting slightly, coming from the tree line to my left, then a moment later stronger from the right side of the clearing. I forced myself to walk down the deck steps into the yard, one hand covering my nose and mouth. My eyes scanned the tree line, looking for any sign of a carcass, any indication of what was producing this god-awful stench. The shadows under the trees were getting deeper as the sun dropped lower, making it hard to see details, but I didn't see anything obvious. No deer carcass, no dead animal of any kind. I walked toward the eastern edge of the clearing where the smell seemed strongest. As I got closer to the trees, my feet started to slow without me consciously deciding to stop. Something about those shadows between the trunks made me not want to get any closer. And the smell, Jesus, the smell was even worse here. So thick I felt like I was swimming through it. That's when I realized I could feel something else besides the nausea. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. That primitive sensation of being watched, of being in the presence of something that was paying attention to me. I stood there maybe 15 feet from the tree line, my heart starting to pound for reasons I couldn't articulate, and I slowly turned in a circle, scanning the forest edge. Nothing. Just trees and shadows and that endless oppressive stench. Dean. Sarah's voice came from the cabin, muffled through the closed windows. Come inside, please. I backed away from the trees, unable to shake the feeling that I was making a mistake, turning my back on them. Sweat was running down my spine. Despite the cooling evening air, my hands were shaking slightly, shaking. By the time I made it back to the deck stairs, I was almost jogging. I got inside and Sarah slammed the sliding door shut behind me, locking it. We stood there together, looking out through the glass at the peaceful-looking clearing and the darkening tree line beyond. My throat felt raw and my stomach was churning. What the hell was that? Sarah's voice was tight, controlled in the way it gets when she's really scared, but trying not to show it. I don't know. Maybe a dead animal nearby. That didn't smell like just a dead animal. She was right, it didn't. But what else could it be? We waited 10 minutes, and when I finally cracked open the door and cautiously sniffed the outside air, the smell was gone. Completely gone. As if it had never been there at all. The evening air smelled normal. Grass and trees and the distant scent of wood smoke from somewhere miles away. I stepped outside and Sarah followed reluctantly. We both stood on the deck, breathing deeply, and there was nothing but normal forest smells. That's weird, I said finally. Sarah's arms were crossed tight over her chest. I don't like this, Dean. It's gone now. Whatever it was, it's gone. Where could it have gone? Smells don't just disappear like that. I didn't have an answer for her. Inside, I could hear the kids' voices. They were upstairs, and whatever had scared them seemed to have passed. Kids are resilient like that. But Sarah kept looking at the tree line with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Something between disgust and genuine fear. I convinced her to let me still grill the chicken. We have to eat, and it's fine now. The smell's completely gone. But we ate inside at the dining table instead of on the deck like we'd planned. The food tasted like ash in my mouth. I kept getting up to look out the windows, checking the tree line, though I couldn't have said what I was looking for. That night, I lay awake, long after Sarah had fallen asleep beside me, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling in the forest outside. Every creak made me tense. Every rustle of leaves made my heart rate spike. I kept thinking about that smell and the way it had seemed to move, to shift location, the way it had appeared so suddenly and then vanished just as quickly. And I kept thinking about the silence in the forest that morning. Two strange things in one day. Probably unrelated. Probably nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with this place. That we'd missed some warning sign, some indication that this beautiful, peaceful cabin in the woods was not what it appeared to be. I finally fell asleep sometime after midnight, and when I did, I dreamed of amber eyes watching me from between dark trees. The growling woke me at 11:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I jerked awake and immediately looked at my phone on the nightstand, my heart already hammering, before my conscious mind had fully processed what I'd heard. It was low and resonant, deep enough that I'd felt it as much as heard it, a vibration that had worked its way into my sleeping brain and dragged me into consciousness. I lay there in the darkness, Sarah breathing softly beside me, and strained to hear it again. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of night. Insects outside the window. The cabin's wood contracting as the temperature dropped. I was about to chalk it up to a dream when I heard it again. Definitely a growl coming from somewhere outside, maybe near the deck. Long and low, the kind of sound that speaks directly to the prey animal part of your brain that knows what it means. Predator. Danger. Run. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah, and moved to the window. Our bedroom faced the front of the cabin, overlooking the deck and the clearing beyond. Through the glass, I could see nothing but darkness. The moon was just a sliver tonight, and the forest around us was absolutely black. No motion sensor light on the deck, no indication of what might be making that sound. But I heard it a third time, and this time I could pinpoint the direction. Off to the left, maybe near where the driveway met the clearing. Something was out there, circling the cabin, investigating. The growl was animal, that much was clear, but it had a quality to it that I couldn't place. Too deep for a dog, too sustained and deliberate. I stood at the window for what must have been 5 minutes, my face nearly pressed to the glass, and saw nothing. Whatever was out there stayed just beyond the range of what little light leaked from the cabin windows. Finally, I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening, every nerve on high alert. At 2:14 a.m., the motion sensor light on the deck exploded into brilliant white illumination. I was out of bed instantly, back at the window. The deck was empty, completely empty. The light showed every detail. The camping chairs we'd left out, the closed lid of the grill, the railing casting sharp shadows on the wooden boards. But there was nothing there that should have triggered the sensor. The light stayed on for its programmed 60 seconds, then clicked off. Darkness rushed back in. I waited, watching, my breath fogging the window glass. 23 minutes later, it happened again. The light blazed on, revealing the same empty deck. Nothing there, nothing moving. But something had triggered it. "Dean?" Sarah's voice was thick with sleep behind me. "What's wrong?" "The motion light keeps going off." I heard her sit up, the rustle of sheets. "Is something out there?" "I don't see anything." She came to stand beside me, and we watched together as the light cycled off again. We stood there in silence for maybe 5 minutes, and then the light triggered again. Still nothing visible on the deck. "Probably just a moth flying past the sensor," I said, but I didn't believe it even as the words left my mouth. "Or wind blowing the chairs." "It's not windy," Sarah said quietly. She was right. The night was still, and the chairs weren't moving. The light continued to trigger every 20 to 30 minutes until dawn started to lighten the sky around 6 a.m. I know because I stood at that window and watched every single time. Sarah eventually went back to bed around 4, but she didn't sleep. I could tell from her breathing that she was lying there awake, listening just like I was. And every time the light came on, there was nothing there. Nothing I could see anyway. But something was triggering it. Something that knew how to stay just out of view or something that moved faster than I could track, or something that was testing us, seeing what kind of response it would get. That thought, when it occurred to me around 5 a.m., made my skin crawl. As soon as there was enough light to see by, I went outside to check the deck and the yard. The morning was cool and damp, heavy with dew. Fog hung between the trees, giving the forest an otherworldly quality. My feet left tracks in the wet grass as I walked the perimeter of the cabin. That's when I found them. The trash cans we'd left near the side of the cabin had been knocked over. Not just tipped, scattered. Garbage was strewn across maybe a 15-foot radius, shredded bags and food waste spread across the grass. But it was the tracks that made my heart stutter in my chest. They were pressed deep into the soft earth near the trash cans, and they were wrong. So wrong that my brain tried to reject what my eyes were seeing. Canine-like prints. Yes, you could see what looked like large paw pads and claw marks, but they were huge, easily twice the size of any dog print I'd ever seen. And mixed in with them were other prints that looked almost like hands. Long digits pressed into the mud but tipped with claw marks that gouged deep furrows. I crouched down next to the clearest print, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. The print was at least 7 inches long. The claws had sunk into the earth a good inch deep. What kind of animal had claws like that? What kind of animal left tracks that looked like a dog, and a human hand had somehow merged into something that should not exist? Oh my God. I jerked upright. Sarah was standing 5 feet away in her pajamas and my jacket, staring down at the tracks. Her face had gone white. Dean, what? What is that? I don't know. My voice came out hoarse. Maybe a bear? Bears don't have hands. Their paws can look sort of hand-like. Dean, she cut me off, her voice sharp. Look at it. Really look at it. That's not a bear. She was right. I knew she was right. But admitting it meant admitting something I wasn't ready to face, that something unidentifiable was in these woods, and it had spent the night circling our cabin, triggering our motion lights, and tearing through our garbage. I walked around the side of the cabin following the tracks. They led from the tree line, crossed to the trash cans, and then went up onto the deck. I could see mud on the deck stairs where something had climbed up. And on the wooden railing, my stomach dropped when I saw this. There were gouges, deep scratches in the wood, fresh and pale against the weathered gray. Claw marks. Sarah was beside me now, and I felt her hand grip my arm, her fingers digging in hard. We need to leave, she said, right now. Pack up the kids and go. Every instinct I had was screaming the same thing, but another part of me, the stubborn, rational part that had served me well my whole life, was pushing back. We'd paid for 3 nights. The kids were still asleep and would be devastated if we cut the vacation short. And it was probably just a bear. A big bear. With weird paws. In broad daylight, with the sun burning off the fog and birds singing in the trees, it was easy to convince myself we were overreacting. Let's be smart about this, I said. We'll keep the doors locked. We won't go out after dark. If we see anything else, anything at all, we'll pack up and leave immediately. Okay? Sarah looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in her face. She wanted to argue. She wanted to demand we leave right then. But she also knew how the kids would react, and she knew we'd spent money we couldn't really afford on this rental. One more day, she said finally. But Dean, I'm serious. If anything else happens, we leave. I promise. Anything else, and we're gone. She nodded slowly, but she didn't let go of my arm. We stood there together on the deck, looking out at the peaceful morning forest, at the tree line maybe 40 yards away, where the fog still clung to the shadows between the trunks. Something had come out of those trees last night. Something big enough to scatter our trash, like it was nothing. Something with claws that could gouge wood like it was soft pine. Something that had circled our cabin for hours, triggering lights, making sounds, testing our perimeter. And it was still out there somewhere, watching us from the darkness under those trees, waiting for night to fall again. I just didn't know it yet. I woke up at 5:47 a.m. on Sunday morning, with one thought crystallized in my mind. We were leaving. Sarah and I had barely slept. We'd lain there in the darkness, listening to every sound, jumping at every creak of the cabin settling. But now, with the first gray light of dawn seeping through the curtains, I'd made the decision. I didn't care about the money we'd lose. I didn't care about disappointing the kids. We were getting out. Sarah was already awake beside me, staring at the ceiling. When I whispered, "We're leaving. Now. As soon as there's enough light," she just nodded and squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. We moved quietly, trying not to wake the kids yet. The plan was simple. Pack everything quickly, load the car, get the kids up and dressed at the last minute, and be on the road by 7 at the latest. Sarah headed upstairs to start throwing things into bags, while I went down to begin carrying stuff to the car. That's when I made the mistake of letting Jake wake up early. I was in the kitchen grabbing our cooler when I heard his footsteps on the stairs, that particular shuffle thump of a 6-year-old still half asleep. He appeared in the doorway in his Batman pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, why are you up?" "Hey, buddy. We're going to head home a little early, that's all. You want some cereal?" He nodded, still drowsy, and I poured him a bowl of the Cheerios we'd brought. I got him situated at the kitchen table with his breakfast, the window right beside him showing the slowly brightening morning outside. Fog still clung to the tree line, but I could see details now. Individual trees, the tire swing hanging motionless, the scattered garbage I hadn't cleaned up yet. "I'll be right back," I told him. "Just going to put this in the car. Don't go anywhere, okay?" "Okay, Dad." I should have stayed with him. God, I should have stayed. I carried the cooler out to the car. It was the 3rd trip I'd made, and I was moving fast, anxious to get everything loaded. The morning air was cool and damp, absolutely silent except for my footsteps on the gravel. No birds yet. That should have warned me. I popped the trunk, hefted the cooler inside, and turned back toward the cabin. That's when I saw Jake through the kitchen window. He wasn't moving. He was frozen with his spoon halfway to his mouth, his entire body rigid, staring at something I couldn't see from my angle. As I watched, the spoon fell from his hand. The bowl tipped over, and I saw milk spreading across the table, dripping onto the floor. But Jake didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared at something outside his window with an expression on his face that no 6-year-old should ever have. Pure, absolute terror. I was running before I'd consciously decided to move, my feet pounding across the gravel, up the deck stairs. I hit the sliding door so hard I nearly bounced off it, scrabbling at the lock with fingers that suddenly didn't want to work. Inside, I burst into the kitchen, and my momentum carried me 3 steps before I saw what Jake was looking at. There was a face in the window. My brain tried to process it and failed. Tried again. Kept failing. Because what I was seeing couldn't exist. Couldn't be real. Violated every law of nature I understood. The head was massive, bigger than any wolf, any dog, anything I'd ever seen. The snout was elongated, lupine, covered in dark, brownish-black fur that looked coarse and wild. But the eyes, Jesus Christ, the eyes. They were amber-colored, bright even in the dim morning light, with round pupils that locked onto mine the instant I entered the room. And they held an intelligence that made my stomach drop through the floor. Not animal intelligence, not the blank stare of a predator evaluating prey. This was something that understood what it was looking at. Something that knew we were a family, that knew Jake was a child, that was studying my son with a terrible calculating awareness. The thing's breath was fogging the glass. I could see condensation spreading across the window with each exhale. Its mouth was slightly open, and I caught a glimpse of teeth. Long, yellowed, too many of them. I could see its shoulder pressed against the siding, massive and hunched, and below that one of its front limbs braced against the cabin wall. Not a paw. Not exactly. Something between a hand and a paw, with long digits ending in black claws that were digging into the wood, leaving fresh gouges. Time did something strange. Everything seemed to slow down and speed up simultaneously. I was aware of multiple things at once. Jake's trembling, the milk still dripping onto the linoleum and now splashing onto my shoes, the smell. That same awful smell from Friday night. Thick and nauseating wet dog and decay and something wild. The creature's eyes tracking from Jake to me, that terrible awareness in them. And then my brain caught up to my body and I was moving, screaming, not words, just a raw sound of primal fury and fear, charging toward the window with my arms spread wide, putting myself between this thing and my son. I saw its eyes widen slightly. Surprise? Recognition of threat? I don't know. But it moved. The face dropped away from the window so fast I barely tracked it. I heard the massive thud of something impossibly heavy landing on all fours, felt it through the floor. Through the window I caught a glimpse of it. A dark mass of fur and muscle, too large, too fast, bounding across the clearing toward the tree line with a loping gait that covered ground in huge, effortless strides. Sarah's screams were coming from upstairs and Emma's too. They'd heard me. Jake still hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. His eyes were locked on the window where the thing had been, but now there was nothing there except fog and morning light and trees. I grabbed him, pulled him against my chest. His whole body was rigid, locked up tight, and his skin was ice cold. It's okay, you're okay, I was saying, over and over out, but the words were meaningless. Nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. Sarah came pounding down the stairs with Emma behind her, both of them white-faced and terrified. What happened? Dean, what? We're leaving, I said. And my voice came out wrong. Too high and tight. Right now. Get Jake's shoes on, I stopped because I just had a thought that turned my blood to ice. I shoved Jake into Sarah's arms and ran for the front door, burst outside, my eyes going straight to the car. The tires. Both front tires were shredded, not flat, shredded. Long gouges tore through the rubber like it was paper, deep enough that I could see the metal rim underneath. Claw marks, the same spacing as the marks on the deck railing on the cabin wall beside the kitchen window. No, I heard myself saying. No, no, no. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. No signal. Not even one bar. I'd had 2 bars yesterday. I'd had enough to do research last night. But now there was nothing, just that empty no service message mocking me from the screen. I ran back inside where Sarah was trying to get Jake into his shoes, but he was limp, unresponsive, still locked in wherever he'd gone when he saw that face. "The car," I started, and Sarah looked up at me and knew from my expression that it was bad. "The landline," she said. "The cabin has a landline." I grabbed the phone off the kitchen wall and held it to my ear. Dead. Complete silence, not even a dial tone. I pressed the button a few times, but it was lifeless. The line had been cut, or something had happened to it. We were trapped. "Upstairs," I said. "Master bedroom, now." Sarah didn't argue. She scooped Jake up. He was dead weight in her arms, his eyes still vacant. And I grabbed Emma's hand and we ran up the stairs. I could hear something outside now, moving through the brush at the edge of the clearing, branches snapping. That smell was getting stronger, seeping through the walls. We got into the master bedroom and I locked the door. A flimsy interior lock that would stop nothing, but it was what we had. I dragged the dresser in front of the door while Sarah put Jake on the bed and wrapped him in blankets. He was shaking now, finally, which was somehow worse than the stillness. Emma was crying, asking what was happening. What was that thing? And Sarah was trying to comfort her while her own voice shook. "We're okay," I said, trying to sound confident and failing utterly. "It's full daylight. In a few hours we'll walk to the main road. It's only 2 miles. We can do that." "A few hours?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Dean, we need to go now." "I don't think it's full daylight yet. Not enough." I was making this up as I went, operating on instinct and half-remembered things I'd read last night about predators preferring dawn and dusk. "We wait until at least 10, full sun, then we run." It was 7:15 a.m. We had nearly 3 hours to survive. The scratching started at 7:23. Long, deliberate scraping sounds against the siding directly below our window. Like nails on a chalkboard, but deeper, more resonant. The sound of something hard and sharp, dragging across wood. Then it moved. I could track its progress around the cabin by sound. Scratching at the back door. Testing it. Then silence for maybe 30 seconds before we heard it at the front door. The handle rattling, something pushing against the wood. Emma was sobbing into Sarah's shoulder. Sarah had grabbed a kitchen knife from downstairs during our run up here, and she held it now with white knuckles, the blade shaking. I'd snatched the fireplace poker and I gripped it so hard my hands ached. These weapons were ridiculous, inadequate. If that thing got through the door, if it really wanted to get to us, these flimsy barriers wouldn't stop it. The scratching moved to the windows downstairs. We heard glass creaking, wood groaning. It was testing everything, probing for weaknesses. My mouth tasted like metal, pure fear, sharp and overwhelming. Then came the sounds. Growling, yes, but underneath that, something else. Something that made every hair on my body stand on end. It was trying to make words. Guttural wrong. Produced by a throat and mouth not designed for human speech, but unmistakable. I heard something that sounded like coom, dragged out, broken. And later, after another round of circling, something like outside. "It's trying to talk," Emma whispered, and Sarah made a sound like a wounded animal, pulling both kids tighter against her chest. The thing moved around the cabin in a pattern. Scratch, test, prowl. Silent periods that were somehow worse than the sounds, where we didn't know where it was or what it was doing. I kept my eyes locked on the bedroom windows, terrified I'd see that face again, those amber eyes with their horrible intelligence. At 8:47, we heard it climb onto the deck roof. The sound was unmistakable, something massive and heavy pulling itself up onto the shingles. Footsteps above us. Not the light scrabble of a raccoon or squirrel, but deep, deliberate thuds that made dust drift down from the ceiling beams. Emma and Jake both whimpered. Sarah's breath was coming in short, rapid gasps. The thing walked across the roof directly above us. I could track every step. It was pacing back and forth right over our heads. The ceiling creaked. I found myself staring up at the beams, praying they would hold, imagining those claws tearing through shingles and plywood and insulation. More of those awful sounds. Coming out. Closer now, right above us. Then something that might have been laughter. A series of guttural huffs that sounded like nothing natural, nothing sane. I pulled my family closer, all of us huddled on the bed, and I realized I was praying. I'm not a religious man, never had been, but I was praying to anything that might listen that we'd survive this, that my children would see sunset, that this nightmare would end. The sounds continued until 9:43. Then gradually they faded. The footsteps moved away from the cabin. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying, but better than the alternative. We waited. 10 o'clock came. We waited longer. I kept checking my phone, hoping for signal, but there was nothing. Finally, at 10:28, I made the decision. We're going now. Fast as we can. I'll carry Jake. Sarah, you take Emma. We don't stop. We run straight down the driveway to Renard Mills Road. Stay together. If anything happens to me, you keep running. Promise me. Dean, promise me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I picked up Jake. He was more responsive now, able to hold onto my neck, but still trembling and silent. Sarah took Emma's hand. We moved downstairs as quietly as possible, every creak of the steps making us freeze and listen. The cabin was trashed. Furniture overturned. Claw marks everywhere. Windows cracked, but not broken. The front door was still intact, though the wood around the handle was gouged and splintered. I unlocked it and we stepped out into brilliant late-morning sunshine. The clearing looked peaceful, beautiful even. The only signs of horror were the shredded car tires and the tracks everywhere in the soft earth. Go, I whispered, and we ran. Down the porch steps, across the clearing, onto the gravel driveway. Our feet pounded the stones, our breathing harsh and panicked. Jake's weight was heavy in my arms, but I barely noticed. Emma was crying but keeping pace. Sarah's hand was on my back, urging me forward. We made it maybe a quarter mile down the driveway, halfway to the main road, when I heard it, crashing through the forest to our right. Something large, moving parallel to us. Not trying to be quiet anymore. Just raw power and speed. Branches snapping, underbrush exploding. Sarah, run ahead, I said, stopping and turning. Take the kids and run. Don't look back. No, go! She grabbed Jake from my arms, half dragging, half carrying him, while Emma clung to her other hand. They ran. I stood alone in the middle of the gravel drive, fireplace poker gripped in both hands, watching the tree line. It emerged 50 feet behind me. Standing fully upright on two legs, it was at least 8 feet tall. The head was wolf-like, with that elongated snout and pointed ears, but larger than any wolf's head had a right to be. Its body was covered in dark brownish-black fur, thick and coarse, with massive shoulders that bunched with muscle. The arms were too long, hanging past where its knees would be if it were human, ending in those terrible hands. Fur covered with long fingers and black claws that curved like scythes. Its legs were wrong too, digitigrade, bending backwards at the knee like a dog's hind legs. but supporting that massive frame on two legs like it was the most natural thing in the world. The proportions were all wrong, predatory and powerful, and utterly impossible. But it was the eyes that held me frozen, amber and bright and fixed on me with absolute focus, calculating, intelligent, aware. This wasn't an animal, this was something else entirely. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. I could smell it from this distance, that awful wild musk that had haunted us all weekend. I could see its chest expanding with each breath, see the muscles shifting under the fur. Then it opened its mouth and howled. The sound hit me like a physical force, so deep and loud I felt it, vibrating in my chest, in my bones, in my teeth. The howl went on, echoing through the forest, primal and ancient and full of something I couldn't name. Not quite threat, not quite warning, something else. And then, impossibly, it turned away, dropped to all fours with that massive thud I'd heard outside the kitchen window, and bounded back into the forest. Within seconds, it had vanished completely, melted into the trees like it had never been there. I stood there trembling so hard, I could barely keep my grip on the poker, my vision graying at the edges, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Behind me I heard an engine, an old pickup truck coming around the bend in Rinnard Mills Road. The truck slowed and an elderly man leaned out the window, his weathered face creased with concern. But when his eyes took in my appearance, standing in the middle of the road with a fireplace poker, pale and shaking and wild-eyed, something flickered across his expression. Recognition? Not surprise? Like he'd seen this before. "You folks need some help?" he asked. But his eyes were scanning the tree line, and I knew. He knew what was out here. Sarah and the kids were running back toward me now, and I caught them, held them, felt their trembling match my own. "Yeah," I managed to say, "we need help. Please." The old man nodded slowly and pushed open the passenger door. As we piled into his truck, all of us cramming into the cab, too terrified to care about seat belts or personal space, I looked back one last time at that forest, at the shadows under the trees where something massive and impossible was watching us leave its territory. We'd been tested, stalked, terrorized. And for reasons I'll never understand, we'd been allowed to survive. The old man put the truck in gear and we rolled away down Rinnard Mills Road, leaving the cabin and the forest and the nightmare behind us. But I knew, we all knew, that we'd never really leave it behind, that we'd carry this with us forever, that the world we'd known before that weekend was gone, replaced by something stranger and darker and far more dangerous than we'd ever imagined. I still don't know why it let us go, but I'll spend the rest of my life grateful that it did.